over a century, the legendary tales that have surrounded our great British airfields have inspired generations of people, including me, which is why I am on a personal mission to cross the UK to visit some of our most important airfields, to understand not just about their contribution to our past, but importantly, how many of them have helped define our future. From the UK's first flight, through to groundbreaking innovations such as carbon fibre and the jet engine, and the extraordinary effort spent on preserving our aviation heritage. Join me as I explore the story of the airfields that have helped shape Britain and the world. When most people consider military aviation, they tend to focus on the role of the RAF. But for over a century, and 10 years before the RAF was even thought about, the Royal Navy has played a decisive role in the history of military flight. This is the Royal Naval Air Station at Yeovilton, the operational and spiritual home of the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm. Over 100 aircraft are based here, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice anywhere around the world. Now, not only is RNAS Yeovilton one of the busiest military airfields in the UK, it's also home to Europe's largest naval aviation collection, and some of its rarest exhibits are housed here in this fabulous hangar. The collection is in large part dominated by Harriers, and this is the latest addition to that collection. It's been delivered straight from Afghanistan, warts and all. Now, in the past, most museum collections would have stripped an aircraft like this down, but not here, not anymore. They're going to preserve this exactly as you see it, complete with sand in the footwell of the cockpit and the fuselage covered in boot and handprints from the crew that prepared it for its trip back to the UK. I love the change. It represents something really exciting in museum curation, and in many respects preserves not just the military history of the aircraft, but also the social history, the men behind the machines. Henry, the collections here are absolutely fabulous, and it seems only fitting that they should be here at Yeovilton. But tell us a bit more about the origins of the air station itself.
Well, in 1937, a Handley Page Harrow aircraft had some engine trouble and needed to force land and found a convenient flat field. In 1938, the chief test pilot of Westlands Aircraft Company in Yeovil, he was sent out to identify a suitable field to establish an airfield where they could test fly their aircraft and deliver them from. But unknown to them, the Admiralty had commandeered the land to create what became Royal Naval Air Station Yeovilton, which was finally commissioned as HMS Heron in June 1940.
Now, for anybody not familiar with the term Fleet Air Arm, just define it for us.
Well, the Fleet Air Arm is one of the four fighting arms of the Royal Navy, supported by the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. The oldest fighting arms are very clearly the surface ships and the Royal Marines, who were established in 1664. The newer arms of the service are, of course, the submariners, the submarine force, and the Fleet Air Arm, both of which developed at much the same time at the beginning of the last century.
In many respects, the role of the Navy, both militarily and politically, has changed over even the last 20, 30 years. How important is aviation to the modern naval role?
Fundamental. There are few operations which do not include aviation. Some simpler evolutions, international engagement can be conducted by some vessels, but most vessels nowadays have some kind of aviation, whether it be a ship's flight of a single Lynx or a Wildcat, or indeed a single Merlin helicopter from Culdrose. And then you build up into the larger amphibious vessels and the larger Royal Fleet Auxiliaries that have a larger number of aircraft on them, and then ultimately the carriers.
Well, Henry, for me, without doubt, perhaps one of the most iconic aircraft that Britain ever produced was this, the Harrier. An incredible machine, and you are one of the lucky few who got to fly these on operations. What was it like?
Extraordinary, and a phenomenal privilege, of course.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
I remember seeing some of that early footage back in the 1970s of the Harrier under trials and watching it make this incredible vertical landing. I mean, the story of aviation development was almost the holy grail.
Well, through the training, of course, you're introduced to it in bite-sized chunks, but you very quickly realize that you didn't so much step into an aircraft, you really strapped it onto your back. And the versatility and flexibility and variety that it gave you always kept it interesting.
Now, over your many hours of flying these aircraft, were there any particularly tricky moments?
There were, or there was one in particular when I was forced to eject over South Wales.
What happened?
The aircraft control system jammed, which subsequently turned out to be a blockage in the control system at the back of the aircraft. But we were flying very low level, the three of us, and as I pushed over a ridge, I remember pushing quite a lot of negative G over a ridge, and as I came to pull back up the other side to avoid the ground on the other side of the small valley, the control column jammed.
Nothing happened.
So I was converging with the ground at 450 miles an hour.
How high were you?
By the time I ejected, it was treetop height, and when I hit the trees, I jumped out.
But you lived to fly another day, and you have the unique distinction of having then gone on to fly the very last operational Harrier and bring it in to another naval air station.
Absolutely. It didn't dent my enthusiasm for flying the aircraft.
Today, there are over 30,000 people in the Royal Navy, a fraction compared to 75 years ago. At the beginning of the Second World War, the Royal Navy was the largest in the world, consisting of 15 battleships, 66 cruisers, 184 destroyers, 45 escort and patrol vessels, and 60 submarines. RNAS Yeovilton was tasked with training from practical aerial gunnery to landing on aircraft carriers. Now, during the Second World War, it wasn't just pilots and ground crew that were trained here at Yeovilton. Large numbers of the Women's Royal Naval Service, or the Wrens, also came here for an intensive 18-week training period, and it covered all sorts of things from airmanship to meteorology and radio work. But one of the key skills they had to master was that of the aerial plot. How to get information about the course and speed of aircraft in the air to a map or plot on the ground. Now, you'd be right in thinking it's a fairly difficult operation, but here at Yeovilton, well, they came up with their own homegrown way of making it a lot easier. Dave.
Lovely to meet you.
Nice to see you too, sir. Now look, I've come armed with my own Spitfire.
Okay, well, at Yeovilton we'd recognise that as a Seafire, but yes, okay.
All right, a Seafire. Now, the business of plotting was so crucial, and is still so crucial, in getting aircraft into the right place at the right time. But here at Yeovilton during the Second World War, they practiced it out here on the airfield. What were they doing?
Absolutely. It is vital, and you've got to think now that radar was in its infancy, so the Navy had to come up with a way of being able to teach the air traffic control students and the fighter direction control students to bring aircraft to certain points accurately, on time, without the expense of wasting airtime, without the risk of putting an aircraft and a new student at danger, and of course in a way where they could ideally just stop the clock and go and examine what was going wrong during the training.
The training school would measure out a 10 by 10 square on a plotting table and then equate it to a much larger 10 by 10 square laid out on the airfield. Depending on the scale selected, each 10 by 10 square could represent up to 100 miles of airspace. Now, you're going to get me to replicate some of this training today. What are we going to do?
Right, well, you're going to be Fighter Tricycle 1.
Fighter Tricycle 1.
Tricycle 1.
This being my Fighter Tricycle.
This is your Fighter Tricycle 1, FT1, and this is what they used. The tricycle would carry a radio set.
Yep.
It would carry a compass. But the critical thing was the speed. We had to equate a speed, and the crucial piece of kit that you have on board to enable you to do that is a metronome. Because provided you pedal in time with the metronome set at today 54 beats a minute, which matches the gearing of your tricycle to give you the equivalent speed of 200 miles an hour, we should be able to get you around the course.
So I've got my Spitfire here. This is going to be me effectively on my bike, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So where am I going to start and where am I heading?
You're going to start on this side of the board.
So I'll pop that down there.
Indeed.
Okay.
And we will give you a countdown to launch. So I'm going to give you a short course, vector you onto a course to formate with the Sea Hurricane on our board, and hopefully you should arrive on the designated point on our large-scale square today.
Now, I've flown in many historic aircraft. I've never flown, dare I say it, on a tricycle before.
You've
so just
never flown a tricycle before?
Talk me through my aircraft for today, David.
Your aircraft for today is going to have a screen which will give you restricted vision.
Yep.
So that there's no cheating.
How many miles am I going to be flying, do you think?
Let me see, that'll give you about 9 miles flying time.
Okay, right then. Well, it all sounds mind-bogglingly complicated. I can ride a bike, which is good news. I can read a compass, I think. Whether I can pedal in time to the metronome to keep my speed constant for that vital element of 200 miles an hour, that remains to be seen.
That is the secret.
So where am I going to start on simulated airspace here?
Well, on our square today, we're going to aim you down towards the yellow lines there, get you to do a U-turn, line you up and launch you from that point.
Launch me, great. I'll never take off again, will I? I'll be launched here at Yeovilton. Right, okay. Is there any great trick to actually riding the bike itself?
No, just release the brake when you're ready to go.
So,
and what I'll do is set the metronome going for you, and then you can have a practice pedal to the 54 beats a minute. You just pedal one turn per foot as it clicks around.
and try and read a compass at the same time.
Indeed.
And listen to you.
for the radio command. That's
Right then, good luck.
Good luck.
Quite a nice day for a bike ride, really. Okay, Dave, I'm ready for launch.
Ready for launch in 3, 2, 1, launch.
Right, here we go. Tick, top.
Square.
This is me at 200 miles an hour now, screaming through the air, through our tarmac airspace.
Tricycle FT1, vector 270.
270, so I'm heading due north at the moment, which is 0, so I need to bank to the left, 90 degrees, to come on to 270. There we are. Tick, tock, tick.
FT1, vector 090.
090, right, okay, here we go. Turn.
FT1, stand by to stop, and stop.
Stop. Well, Dave, have I managed to find your Sea Hurricane out here?
Let's see how you did. This is what we were hopefully aiming for.
Well, you kept that well hidden, a bit of chalk. I mean, in terms of margin of error,
you're about a half a mile south of ideal target. It's okay. I mean, did you slow down pedaling on the uphill leg?
Well, I was just flying the trike, mate. I mean, you were doing the ground controlling, but I might have throttled back a little bit.
Just a little, but that's not bad. I mean, this is the first time this experiment has been run since at least the 1950s, I would think.
You have to wonder if the ghosts of those Wren controllers are looking across here now in the sunshine, having a good laugh.
I think there's a lot of quiet smiling going on somewhere in Speckington Manor this afternoon. That's
absolutely. Well, here's to you lot. Dave, thank you very much.
Thank you.
As an island, Britain needed to import a vast amount of food and military equipment to survive the Second World War. And it was the Royal Navy's job to protect the merchant ships crossing the Atlantic from America. The Battle of the Atlantic was the longest battle of the war, lasting 6 years.
German U-boats operated quite close to the UK, and they operated in small numbers. But by the autumn of 1940, after Germany has occupied France, the U-boats are based on the French Biscay coast. There are more of them, and they're starting to work in coordinated groups, wolf packs, that will attack a convoy and try to overwhelm the escort and sink large numbers of merchant ships.
One of the most effective ways of deterring U-boat attack relied upon aircraft. But their range from both America and the UK was limited, and it left a gap in the middle of the Atlantic that U-boats exploited. The Germans called the North Atlantic air gap the Black Pit.
Not only were there problems with resources, but there were also problems with tactics and problems with equipment. Short-range aircraft are one thing, but if you haven't got a bomb that works, that's even worse. The anti-submarine bombs used by RAF's Coastal Command had the habit of bouncing off the sea. and exploding underneath the aircraft that had just dropped them. Even if Coastal Command and the Fleet Air Arm didn't have an effective bomb for the opening months of the war, it doesn't mean that they were useless. When an aircraft dove into attack, the reaction of any submarine is to dive. And by diving, you force it to break contact with the convoy.
The Royal Navy didn't have many aircraft carriers, so they used escort and merchant air carriers, or MAX ships. These were converted commercial vessels, which were adapted to have flight decks. Yeovilton provided training for the pilots landing on board them.
The worst month of the war for Allied shipping was November 1942. 846,000 tonnes of Allied shipping was sunk in that month. Now, some of that wasn't in the Atlantic, but that's still an awful lot of shipping, because you don't just lose the ship and its cargo, you lose every cargo that ship could carry in the future. It is a cumulative loss to the Allied war effort.
By 1943, the Allies had the Liberator, a long-range anti-submarine aircraft. This, with the first escort aircraft carriers, new depth charges and aggressive tactics closed the air gap in the North Atlantic.
If the Germans had broken the convoy routes, Britain would not have been able to pursue the war. Without the convoys, Bomber Command stops flying. Without the convoys, Montgomery's 8th Army doesn't move. Without the convoys, Britain doesn't have food. It is the most important battle of the war.
One aircraft that made a huge contribution to the Battle of the Atlantic was the Fairey Swordfish. It operated from 14 escort carriers and 18 MAX ships. Here at Yeovilton, the Royal Navy Historic Flight have 3 in their collection, and one of only 2 left flying in the world. Chris!
Hey Jules, how are you?
Nice to see you, mate. Look for the Swordfish and I will find you, and they were absolutely right on this glorious day and this glorious aircraft.
Yeah, it's lovely. Mark I Swordfish, just stunning.
And when was this one actually built?
She was built in 1941, when she came into service. The actual type started flying in 1934, came into service in 1936, and biplanes were pretty well extinct by then anyway.
Can we take a wander around and have a closer look?
Indeed. The interesting thing, obviously, torpedo on the Mark I was generally the flavour.
Yeah.
But the good thing about the string bag and why it's called the string bag was what we could put onto it, and we could keep putting more and more stuff on. That's what was the key thing. You know, we could put depth charges in, obviously, for the anti-submarine threat. We could put rockets on there as well. So we kept growing it all the time to what the threat was, and that's what makes it a string bag, is what you could keep shoving onto her to make her very effective.
Can we take a closer look at the kind of business end?
Absolutely.
What was the number of crew?
For these Marks III crew, pilot obviously sits at the front.
Yep.
Behind him is the observer, and he's in charge of obviously making sure the aircraft gets back to where it needs to go. And behind him was the TAG, which is a telegraph air gunner, and his job was mainly to look after the radio and make sure it worked. And he would actually unwind an aerial when they got airborne into the slipstream, because obviously it's not like
Just a sort of wire hanging out the back of the aircraft.
Absolutely, a wire hanging out the back of the aircraft and a set of crystals to make sure it worked. And it was a matter of pride, so he would always be sitting in the back there.
Seeing this aircraft today in the glorious and rather cosy surroundings of Somerset is one thing, but we have to picture them on a windswept deck out in the Atlantic or the Mediterranean, taking off into a situation which, let's face it, had no guaranteed outcome.
There's a couple of times whereby, they come back, especially on the when you went round the top into, to support Russia. People could be, sub-zero even before getting airborne. 5-6 hours up there, and they had to sometimes be winched out because they physically couldn't stand up again.
Now, this is the oldest aircraft in your collection. Can we take a closer look? What else you've got stashed away there?
Absolutely, come on in.
Now, I know you've also got a Seahawk. That's not here today, is it?
No, she's in the lower hangar, unfortunately, so we can't see her today. But the intention is in time to get that back up and flying. In the meantime, we have this beauty.
You've got this, which you've kind of kept till last, Chris. The Sea Fury. This is an aircraft that you regularly fly, isn't it?
I've been very, very privileged. Yeah, I've got about 232 hours in her during my flying time, and yeah. It's the absolute end point for, British aircraft in the sense of piston. After this, it was all turbines and jets. So this is where the UK stopped and really does typify the end point.
But when were these introduced into service?
Prototypes just at the end of the Second World War came into service in 47.
47, so 1947 for the Fury, 1937 for the Swordfish. But what a change, what a difference.
Yes, indeed. It's just stunning to see how the development through time of not only obviously the airframe aerodynamics, but the engine, and this typifies pretty well everything out it. It's basically close to a jet. It's not a jet, obviously, because of the whirly bit at the front, but it goes awfully fast. 380 knots is generally very easy in it. The limit is 425 knots. You know, it's 450 miles an hour out of a piston engine aircraft.
And clearly appointed for naval use with these folding wings to allow it to cram onto those busy carrier decks.
Absolutely, yeah. Footprint on board the ship is a massive point for all aircraft, and therefore, yes, folding wings, as does the Swordfish, they fold back. In this case, these ones fold up. On these particular sides, you could put rockets up the side of the aircraft or bombs, or you could put 500-pound bombs on the inboard or 1,000-pound bombs or fuel tanks. And the fuel tank could actually have a camera in as well, so it could do multi-role. And this one was a fighter bomber again. So mainly the air-to-air still was, in this particular case, cannons. And this one has obviously 4 30mm ones. And then finally the rockets.
Now, keeping these aircraft in the air decades after they were ever designed to be still flying is a hazardous business, as you know well, because you have had a little upset in one of these, haven't you?
Absolutely, yes. Unfortunately, I had an engine failure in the Sea Fury down at Coldrose on the 31st of July. Anything mechanical can break, whether it be from that era all the way through to now. It was 60 seconds, which was quite emotional.
You saved yourself, and in large part the aircraft too, for which you were rightly awarded the Air Force Cross.
Yeah, no, I'm still getting to sort of terms with that award.
But it goes to highlight the hazards of keeping these aircraft alive, but also I think you probably agree it's still a worthwhile operation to allow the public to see these aircraft still airworthy, still in the skies above us, to remind us of their heritage and their pedigree.
Without doubt, you know, if we forget our history at our peril, it comes around again. The key thing for us is obviously highlighting the Earth is 70% water. You know, we have to have a Navy to go out and do things, take the fight out to places, or support humanitarian aid, whatever it may be. That's what we need, and we need, you know, platforms such as this. And, you know, the key flexibility, we can operate both from land and from sea, and that's what the key thing is for us.
In the 1930s, the Royal Navy showed remarkable foresight in carrying out tests with the predecessor to the helicopter, the autogyro. They landed one on the deck of HMS Furious, one of the earliest aircraft carriers. That prompted the Navy to think further about the use of rotorcraft in naval operations. So they approached the Americans, where helicopter development was well underway.
The first real use of them was in casualty evacuation from battlefields and so on, and also pulling pilots who'd crashed on takeoff from, or indeed from landing from carriers. But now we use them for a much, much wider range of things with, if we think about the way that the Fleet Air Arm operates all around the world, then we've got helicopters being used for drug controls in the Caribbean. We're using them for anti-piracy around the Horn of Africa. And of course in a variety of different ways in humanitarian rescues.
The first order for a naval helicopter, the Sikorsky R4, later known as the Hoverfly, was in 1943. And since then, there have been over 150 different types of helicopter produced.
If I was to choose some iconic helicopters, I'd probably go for the Dragonfly, the Whirlwind, the Lynx and the Wessex 5. Dragonfly because it was the first really capable helicopter that the Fleet Air Arm had, used for casualty evacuation and for what's called plane guard, picking pilots up out of the water. But it was very limited in its capability to do much more. Then we move on to the Whirlwind, which was built in a number of styles, but the later Whirlwinds actually started to carry anti-submarine detection equipment and the ability to drop a torpedo. It was the Wessex 5, which used in Borneo during the confrontation in the mid-1960s, that got the name of Commando Helicopter Squadrons of the Junglies, because of flying in and out of jungle clearings and so on. And then finally I'd go for the Lynx, which operated from here at Yeovilton for many years. Very fast, very manoeuvrable, but of course it was the Lynx that went on to, in modified form, take the world helicopter speed record in the early 1980s.
The Navy has long been at the forefront of rotary aviation, and in 1947 the Navy formed 705 Squadron, the first ever British Armed Forces squadron devoted entirely to helicopters.
The story of helicopters has been one of continuous development. Faster, bigger, more load, more capability. The Sea King's going out of service, the Lynx is going out of service to be replaced respectively by the Merlin and the Wildcat. And in each case, they're bigger, they are more powerful, they have more modern avionics, digital electronics and so on, can carry in different and more sophisticated weaponry, can carry more, can go further, can do more. That's the next chapter in the book of helicopters.
Up until recently, the Westland Sea King was the giant of the Fleet Air Arm. But after over 40 years of service, carrying Royal Marines, field guns, troops, and thousands of tons of relief supplies around the world, they're now being retired. Neil.
Great to see you.
Very nice to see you, sir. This is a real treat to get up close and personal with, I think, one of the most iconic aircraft that Britain's operated over the last 40 odd years or so.
I think so. I mean, obviously nearly 4 decades in service for the Sea King and Sea King Mark IV in particular. I've been flying since 1991 and had a wonderful time, absolutely wonderful time, on operations around the globe for nearly 40 years.
But its reputation for being able to operate in the most demanding of environments and its robustness are legendary. What is it about this aircraft that's made it so successful?
I think it is exactly that. It's just been everywhere and done everything. There isn't a theatre of operations that we haven't taken the Sea King to, whether that's from the maritime onto the land, in the Arctic, in the desert, in the jungle, or just in temperate climes. It's been everywhere and done everything.
Can we take a wander along the body,
yeah,
and get a sense of it? Because there are so many features in the design of this aircraft that I think really distinguish it. That lovely bow, that almost like a flying boat bow that sits at the front.
Well, exactly that. It's got a boat-shaped hull. It was designed to be a sea-going aeroplane, and should the worst come to the worst, obviously it had the boat-shaped hull for when it landed on the sea.
But looking at the tail here, again, it almost looks like the stern of a ship. I mean, we never seem to see them floating around on water, but they were designed to do that.
Absolutely, yeah, and some nations actually practice landing on the water and taking off from it as well with a Sea King. We didn't have the pleasure of that.
I mean, we tend to imagine them in combat roles, particularly with regard to the Royal Marines, of course, and the Commando helicopter force, but their role in disaster relief over the last 40 years has also been pretty impressive.
Absolutely, as recently as the Philippines Operation Patwin just a couple of years ago, they were embarked in HMS Illustrious, which steamed quickly to go to the aid of those in the Philippines and provided a huge amount of aid, just whether it's relief stores, lifting them into place or moving people around to the less hit areas. So yeah, absolutely.
I share your sense of sadness that we are coming to the end of an era, but the future is also very, very exciting. What's going to replace this aircraft?
Seems like a good time to go and show you the Merlin.
Well.
So here's the replacement. The Merlin Mark III, which we've inherited from the Royal Air Force. It's been operational for 10 years already, and we'll be doing much the same thing, but just taking it to sea and doing the same as we have been with the Sea King. A great bit of kit and a 21st century helicopter, just a huge improvement on what we had with the Sea King beforehand.
I mean, it is clearly a lot bigger than a Sea King. In terms of its capability, how has that been enhanced?
First of all, you say it's a lot bigger, but actually the footprint and where the undercarriage there sits is pretty much the same as a Sea King was, so that we can fit it onto the back of all the decks that we used to operate the Sea King from beforehand. But it does, even within that footprint, provide almost double the capability that we used to have on the Sea King.
One of the most distinguishing features, I suppose, has to be that tail ramp. Can we have a look inside?
Absolutely, yeah, let's go and have a look. It's a lot better for ingress and egress of the aeroplane with the extra access. We've got the door similar to the Sea King on the front left, a similar door on the right, but clearly the ramp at the back here, which provides easier access for the troops. And as you can see,
it's cavernous.
It's absolutely significantly bigger.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it speaks for itself, really, the volume.
It does, absolutely. I mean, you look at compared to the back of the Sea King. The Sea King was designed to take 27 and the troops in the back of it, but they're tiny seats and no room for any of their kit around it. Bigger troop seats, a lot more room in between for all their kit as well. 24 fully laden troops, pretty comfortable to go into the fight wherever they need to go.
But the whole thing is just much more ergonomic, isn't it? I mean, these seats, the way everything folds away, it's just been designed with modern operations in mind, more so than the Sea King could ever have been conceived for, I suppose.
Absolutely. I mean, there's obviously different variants of the Merlin. We've got the anti-submarine variant down at Coldrose as well, also operated by the Navy. But this one, troop design, designed for troops, to take troops into battle, and it's perfect for it. Everything down to communications leads, to seats, to the room for all their kit in between. It's ideal.
I can tell you're extremely excited about this aircraft, Neil.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've only had a couple of weeks flying it myself, but it's great fun. It goes further, it goes quicker. It's really smooth aeroplane to operate, and a dream for the pilot up the front as well.
So, what's the length of service that we'd expect to see the Merlin in for?
Well, at least until 2030, probably 2040. It's all a bit up in the air at the moment, but for at least another 15 to 20 years.
Now, I can see and hear an awful lot of flying going on today, Neil. Very, very cheeky question. What are the chances of getting in the air?
I'd be delighted. I'm sure we can sort something. Just a choice to make, Sea King or Merlin.
A choice I was not expecting. Crikey. Well, look, I've potentially got another 40 years to fly in one of these. But Sea King, if it's going out of service, it's such an iconic aircraft. That's my choice.
Absolutely. Let's go.
Well, we're finally airborne in this wonderful Sea King. Very historic aircraft. I think John is going to open the door. Open it up. Fantastic. There we go. Doors open, and there is Somerset below me. It's incredibly smooth, actually. Much smoother than I was expecting it to be. Yeah? Especially given the weather.
It just depends what pilot you get, to be honest.
Yeah, Roger.
Like you got the cream and the crop that's sat up the front.
Well, we're now flying over the airfield. What a fantastic view of its main runway there. John, this is a sight you've seen many times, but I guess you never tire of it from where you're sat now.
That's right, I absolutely love it sitting up here.
It's much more compact than you appreciate on the ground.
It is, yeah.
You're going to jump over here towards the door. You get a real sense of that downwash from the blades, but also the heat from the exhaust that's washing down the side of the aircraft. But what a view! Now I'm being flown today by Matt and Alex, who are up the front. Let's go and get a pilot's eye view of this lovely aircraft. Matt, as I understand it, you were the last pilot to qualify on the Sea King, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, finally finished flying training in December, and then got my wings in January of this year.
So 5 years training, just when you've jumped in the hot seat, they're going to take it away from you.
Yeah, I'll have about just over 2 years of flying the Sea King. Yeah, should be converting over to the Merlin, hopefully at some point next year.
But Alex, I guess you've served around the world?
Yeah, I say around the world, most of the time in Afghanistan for the last 6 years or so.
Yep.
So I joined the front line in 2008, right when it was starting to get all heated.
And are you both looking forward to getting your hands on a Merlin?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's a lovely aircraft. It sits out there.
There it is. I mean, what a view. I mean, it's an interesting kind of aerial transition, this, from the old to the new, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So there we are. We're heading straight towards Glastonbury Tour. So we are virtually at treetop level now. I mean, great demonstration of why the helicopter in general is such a useful aircraft. John, this will make you smile. As a kid, 40 odd years ago, I used to play with this little toy Sea King. It's slightly battered and bruised. I never thought I'd ever have the chance to get him one, let alone fly him one. But there it is, airborne at last, 40 years later. But somehow rather sad to think that this is one of the last landings that aircraft like this are going to make in the foreseeable future. But we have seen the future, of course. The Merlin flying alongside us today. In 40 years' time, I wonder what they'll be talking about. Without a doubt, the Navy's most impressive piece of kit has to be their biggest. I am, of course, talking about aircraft carriers. As helicopters and jets become larger and more powerful, they require more space to manoeuvre. HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales will be the largest carriers ever built for the Royal Navy.
We're very proud in the Royal Navy that we invented aircraft carriers, and we were the first to use them as a real part of a battle group at sea. And the first famous battle that is largely attributed to be the model for carrier strike operations is the Battle of Taranto, which was on the 11th of November 1940. And that's when swordfish aircraft from HMS Illustrious really neutralised the Italian fleet in the harbour of Taranto in southern Italy, and really turned the tide of the war in the Mediterranean. So if we fast forward a few decades, and the invasion of the Falklands by Argentina in 1982, and the Britain sailed a task force down there to reclaim the islands, if we hadn't had Harrier jets operating off our aircraft carriers there, we wouldn't have been able to defend the fleet, and we most certainly wouldn't probably have been able to win the war.
The Navy currently has 64 surface warships, 10 submarines and 13 ships of the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. The latest addition to the fleet is the aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth.
The whole shape of the Royal Navy is built around the ability to project a task force at sea. So when this ship sails, she'll be accompanied by destroyers and frigates and submarines and oil tankers and solid support shipping, and so very, very much providing the flagship of the Royal Navy.
HMS Queen Elizabeth is 283 metres long, 73 metres wide and 56 metres from the keel to the masthead. She'll carry up to 50 aircraft and a crew of 1,600. The carrier has a power plant of 110 megawatts. That's enough to power a town the size of Swindon.
Where we're standing right now is the top of the ski jump ramp. And that's one of the really unique things. It's a British invention, and the very few aircraft carriers employ them. Of course, we don't have catapults and arrestor gear. So the way the aircraft launch from our flight deck is what we call a short takeoff and vertical landing. So they'll be on full power, they'll launch themselves from near the back of the ship, they'll accelerate down the runway, and this ski jump here provides a little bit of extra lift to get them up and into the air.
HMS Queen Elizabeth will be fully operational and ready to enter service by 2020, with HMS Prince of Wales following in 2022.
We are very proud to be a part of these ships. They are the centrepiece of the Royal Navy, they are the flagships of the Royal Navy, and what better name to have for our ship than our monarch HMS Queen Elizabeth. So I think we can be very proud to be bringing these into service, and I think for the next 50 years the nation will be glad that we did.
The Navy's aircraft don't just operate from aircraft carriers, they're also found on destroyers and frigates. The newest member of the impressive naval fleet of helicopters is the Wildcat, a multi-role aircraft that can do just about anything. Hugh, as squadron numbers go, 825 has an illustrious history and now been reformed and re-equipped with these fabulous new aircraft.
Yeah, no, we're very, very lucky. I mean, obviously we've got these, say, the brand new Wildcat, and it stems back, say, for the history of this squadron. Honours in World War II, reformed for Korea, most recently in 1982 for the Falklands War, and then, say, back today as a training unit, but also as a frontline squadron with these brand new aircraft.
I mean, this hangar is absolutely extraordinary. I have seen quite a few on my travels over the last few months, but this one is immaculate. It is like walking into a new car showroom, and everything has that new car smell about it. Is Christmas come early to Yeovilton with this new fleet?
Well, we certainly think so. It's an immaculate squadron, and the aircraft itself, it looks brand new. It is brand new, clearly worth a lot of money, a huge investment, and it's a huge leap forward from our perspective in terms of what we had before.
But even just looking at the tail section there, that looks very different to anything I've seen on a helicopter.
It is. I mean, the aircraft itself, it's predominantly designed around its aerodynamics, and it's much more powerful. It needs to be more powerful to carry the extra equipment we've got.
Yeah.
So the tail is aerodynamically based to apply some additional torque reaction force for us.
Now, in the past, 825 operated as a single squadron, but I understand that these aircraft will be deployed singly to individual frigates and destroyers with a multi-role capability in mind. Give us an idea of the sort of task that these aircraft will have to undertake in the future.
You're absolutely right, Jules. And we deploy as a single aircraft, single crew, single team of engineers onto a ship, and we'll do whatever that ship requires of us. Our primary role is anti-surface warfare, so finding ships, identifying them, and then using a strike capability if necessary. We can also carry weapons for anti-submarine warfare, be they torpedoes or depth charge, but also we carry a search and rescue capability. And we've got one aircraft deployed at this time out in the Caribbean, and there's going to be many more in the future.
Now, none of these aircraft, as I'm looking at them, seem obviously armed, but they are distinguished by that extraordinary feature on the nose, which I gather gives them their unique capability over and above their predecessors.
Absolutely right. There's a couple of large bumps on the nose. One is the radar underneath, which is a huge step forward. That's 360 degrees, where previously the Lynx was 180. But we've also got the camera, as you say. So once we've detected the contact out there using the radar, the camera is fantastic for identifying what that is, and it works up to significantly larger ranges than we're used to. And it's very much the same you sort of see on police helicopters nowadays, with a few subtle amends for the military use.
Now, I imagine internally it's also been radically rethought. What are the chances of getting a look inside?
No, we can certainly do that. I say externally you've noticed some of the differences. Internally is radically different, and I've got one powered up over here, so we can go and have a look at that.
You see, I asked you that cheekily. I thought you were going to say no and it was all top secret.
Would I?
Well, Hugh, this really does represent a revolution. This is the most clinically clean cockpit I think I've yet seen in an aircraft. It looks much simpler, much easier to operate. What's it like to fly?
It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, in terms, much more power than we're used to, significantly more manoeuvrable. Very similar to the Lynx in terms of how it flies, but smoother, and I say that extra power makes a real difference. It's the glass cockpit that we've been waiting for, hugely versatile, all entirely integrated. You can see we've got 4 screens in front of us. I've got mine on the right-hand side to fly, with all my flying instruments on, and then the left 3 can be used for all manner of different things. From the camera on the left, you can see we've got 2 different digital mapping setups there, but we can also put the radar on there, and flexibility across the board, really.
So clearly there, your air charts, and in front of me here, this rather ghostly infrared image of that tug out there in the hangar. Can I adjust the camera?
Feel free to.
Left or right? Yeah. Gosh, it's very sensitive, isn't it? I mean, terrifyingly like a video game, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very, very sensitive, as you say, and the guys spend a lot of time training on it to make sure they can use it to detect the contacts out there.
But an extraordinary range that really gives this aircraft a capability far in excess of anything that you've been able to fly before.
Absolutely. I mean, the radar gives us fantastic detection ranges, and the camera is absolutely fantastic in terms of identifying what we've managed to detect, and the ranges we get on that, again, leaps and bounds ahead of what we're used to.
Well, the Wildcat is known only to a handful of people at the moment, but I suspect in the years to come it will become a household name, just as the Lynx was.
Absolutely, yeah. It's going to be a stalwart of the Fleet Air Arm for many years to come.
In the history of military flight, the role of the Royal Navy has often been overlooked, but its contribution to the development of aviation and our nation's history as a whole has been as important as it has been decisive. From its very first aircraft right through to its modern multi-role helicopters and fast jets of today, naval air power has given the Royal Navy a reach and capability far beyond that of its surface fleet. So next time you turn on the news and catch a glimpse of one of these aircraft working somewhere around the world, spare a thought that it probably started out life here at a field in Somerset.